going through some of the analytics. Okay, so one other thing that I like using is a universal replayer. And what this thing does is it just visualizes hand histories. So you'll feed it a hand history in a text file, it animates it, it probably does other things, but it's free. And this thing's been around for a while. I'm not even sure if it's supported anymore, but it's a thing that I'm used to. So this is what it looks like. Just give it a hand, and then it reproduces what you might have seen if you actually played that hand. So let's move on to a concept. So stack size. So this might seem fairly simple, but we ought to make sure we're talking about the same thing when we go through this. So your stack size it's the value of the chips in front of you. So that's fairly normal. But we have this thing called effective stack size, which is what we're usually going to be talking about when we refer to stack, which is the minimum of your stack or the next biggest stack after you. And the way to think about this is the number of chips you could possibly lose in this one hand. That's what your relevant stack size is. And the way you make decisions will depend on your effective stack much more than anything else. So an example of this would be, say you're in a heads-up situation where you're the hero here in the small blind, right? Big blind has whatever 300 chips, and you have some amount of chips with queens. All right. So if you have 1,500 chips, and so does he. Say blinds are are 10-20. You have what, 50 times the blinds combined here. So this is a pretty different hand than aces. Why? So say that you raise with queens, and then he raises you. Okay, so you raise to 60, he raises you to 200, you raise to 600, and he pushes to 1,500. Your queens are probably not really that good anymore. It matters how many chips you have here. However, if you have 300 chips, you raise with queen, is over. You can't fold that. You might as well have aces, and it makes your hands, the way you play hands, materially different. That's why chip size matters in general. When the chip stack is low, you're playing these two hands basically identical. You're saying you're just playing this range. However, when we're talking about effective chip stack, it's the same thing. Where even if you have 1,500 and he has 300, if you raise, he's going to push. You don't have the opportunity to do that back and forth anymore. So you might as well have 300 with regard to your decision making here. That's why we're looking at the effective stack, because it really has the least number of chips, because that determines when the so really, I like this definition the most amount of chips that you can lose in the hand. It's a lot more, I think, simple to think about than this min formula. Okay, and then we're almost always talking about effective stack. Let's talk about Dan Harrington. So Dan Harrington is a player whose style I very much like. His nickname's Action Dan, which the consensus is he just kind of gave himself, because he's considered Mr. Fundamental, tight, aggressive ABC player. So this playing style, this temperament, tight, aggressive, is something that is used to characterize basic playing styles. So let's quickly go through what those are. So there are two different actions here. There's how often you bet, where a bet means you are raising the stakes, so either you bet or you raise. And then here's how often you call. Either you call a lot or you call not that much. You can get a good feel for the type of person someone is by what box they is playing. So these have names. So Someone who's tight aggressive, you would just refer to them as tag, which is like what Dan Harrington is. Like you bet when you have good hands and you fold when you have bad hands. Another like possibly winning strategy is loose aggressive lag, where you certainly bet when you have good hands, but you will see a lot of cards before you'll give up on a hand. Like you're definitely willing to call a lot. These tight passive are not pronounceable words, so the community generally came up with different words to describe them. So a tight passive person is weak. Like they're someone who you can completely run over because they fold when they have a bad hand, they check when they have a good hand. Like they're like, I guess it'd be called like rocks. Like you never need to worry about having a big losing night against these guys. So someone who's tight passive is generally considered playing suboptimally. And then the loose passive people are described via this icon, which I forget what it's from. I think it might be from an old version of like Poker Tracker, or maybe it was like on Party Poker or something. But everyone loved seeing this icon, which you could label people at, because a loose passive person is what? They are a calling machine. That's what that stands for, and it means that when you have a hand, they will call all of your bets. You will extract value out of them. But when they have a hand, they're okay with letting you look at your draws to make a decision about whether, like, by the river you have a hand or not. Like, there's virtually no way that these guys are making money in poker. Like, I think it would be, like, over a realistic sample size, there's no type of player who could fit in this quadrant and be good enough on any other metric to actually be making money in poker. So in general, how we look at this is, we would call this tag guy like solid ABC. Like that's what I'm recommending you guys play as. You can, like, tag players, like as a quadrant, are going to be the biggest winners. Lag players, someone who's very aggressive and plays a lot of hands, could possibly be a pretty good winner. It depends on the type of game, and then like their opponent and their ability to pick spots. But there are a lot of big lag winners. There are not a lot of big weak winners, and there are not a lot of calling machines, loose passive players who are not big losers. So anytime you see, like, this is the definition of someone who's a complete fish, like a huge donator to the game. And your ability to recognize this type of thing will help you find, like, good games to play when you see someone doing this kind of thing. Anyway, back to Action Dan. So, Dan Harrington is a pretty good poker player. He's been around the block. He won the main event back in 1995 when it had like 300 people in it. He has 2 World Series of Poker bracelets and 1 World Poker Tour title. But anyway, so Harrington popularized this thing called the M ratio, which was invented by someone else. So the M ratio was invented by this guy, Paul McGrill, who's a backgammon theorist. Apparently one of the best backgammon players in the world, commentator for the WSOP, World Series of Backgammon, and 8 WSOP final tables. Anyway, so he's supposedly really, really good at math, even by like MIT standards. But he invented a thing called the M ratio, but then it never caught on until Harrington started doing it. All right, so Harrington's M ratio is your effective stack divided by the sum of the blinds and the ends. So you'll hear people talk about, like, oh, I had 10 big blinds or like 15 big blinds or whatever to talk about their fish stack, but that has the fundamental problem of it has a lot of different problems. One is it doesn't tell the story of, so blinds So the usual blind levels are like 1-2 or 2-4, where the big blind is just twice the small blind. So that's like the assumption. But if you're at a blind level that's like 1-3, and then like or 3-5, the number of big blinds you have is not indicative of anything. It's not indicative of like how many hands you can see or like how much you care about winning a pot pre-flop. So using big blinds is bad. In addition to, once you start having like, if you're 50, 100 blinds and you have an ante of like 25, like you have basically half the stack that you had before in realistic terms. Just to get big blinds doesn't factor in antes at all, and that's a major problem referring to it like that. Using M seems to make a lot more sense. So what it is it's basically the like percentage of your stack that is the blinds and the antes. So it's like how many rounds of poker you can survive if you just fold every single hand. Of course, you're not going to do that, although I think that's what he's actually getting at, because he uses M to refer to when you have to make a move, which is not generally